That's a pretty high-end vehicle. Is it registered to you?
Yes, officer. It's mine.
Mind showing me some ID?
Sure.
And what do you do for work?
I serve in the judicial system.
All right, for now, just step over here.
Officer Kevin Mercer. That's quite the vehicle you're driving there. Mind telling me how someone like you ends up with a $250,000 Lamborghini? Judge Samuel Carter. The same way anyone purchases a vehicle, officer. I earned the money and bought it. Officer Kevin Mercer. Earned it. Right. Must have been one hell of a payday for that kind of cash. Judge Samuel Carter. My career, my income, my property. Everything about this vehicle is legitimate. Officer Kevin Mercer, badge number 7294 of the Westside Police Department, saw a black man in a tailored white suit fueling a pearl white $240,000 Lamborghini Urus at a suburban gas station and immediately assumed the luxury SUV was either stolen or purchased with proceeds from illegal drug sales. He activated his patrol lights, blocked the exit with his cruiser, approached with his hand resting on his service weapon, and demanded to know where the man obtained the vehicle because people like you don't drive cars like this unless they're stolen or bought with dirty money. When Judge Samuel Carter calmly presented his vehicle registration proving legal ownership, Officer Mercer accused him of possessing forged documents and threatened to impound the SUV and arrest him for grand theft auto. What Mercer didn't know was that Carter was a state superior court judge with 28 years of legal experience who had purchased the Lamborghini with his judicial salary, that the entire confrontation was being captured by gas station security cameras and a bystander's smartphone, and that his racially motivated assumption that a black man couldn't legally own a luxury vehicle would cost him his badge and result in a $9.5 million civil rights lawsuit that would expose systemic racism within the department. Before we go further, what city or state are you watching from? Drop it in the comments. We love seeing where you're tuning in from. If you believe that driving an expensive car while black isn't a crime and shouldn't be treated as inherently suspicious, then like this video and subscribe. We're telling stories that matter, stories about justice, accountability, and the Constitution we all swore to uphold. Samuel Carter grew up in a different America than the one we live in today. Born in 1969 in the South Side of Chicago, he was raised in a two-bedroom apartment by parents who believed that education and hard work could overcome any obstacle. His father, Marcus Carter, worked two jobs, driving a city bus during the day and working security at a warehouse at night. His mother, Dorothy, cleaned houses in the wealthy northern suburbs, riding two buses each way to scrub toilets and mop floors for families who barely acknowledged her existence. They were working people, the kind of Americans who built this country with their sweat and determination. Marcus had served 2 tours in Vietnam, came home to a nation that didn't appreciate his sacrifice, and channeled his frustration into providing for his family. Dorothy had grown up picking cotton in Mississippi before her family migrated north during the final years of the Great Migration. Neither of them had college degrees, but they understood something fundamental. Their son would have opportunities they never had, but only if he worked twice as hard as everyone else. Young Samuel learned this lesson early. While his white classmates could slide by with B's and C's, he needed A's to be taken seriously. While they could get in trouble and be called boys being boys, he had to be beyond reproach. His parents didn't sugarcoat reality. The world isn't fair, son, his father told him when he was 12. But that doesn't mean you give up. It means you work harder, get smarter, and prove them wrong every single day. Samuel did exactly that. He graduated valedictorian from his high school in 1987. He earned a full academic scholarship to Northwestern University, where he majored in political science and graduated summa cum laude in 1991. He attended Northwestern Law School on another scholarship, served as editor of the Law Review, and graduated in the top 5% of his class in 1994. His first job was as a public defender in Cook County. The pay was terrible, $32,000 a year, but the work mattered. He represented people who couldn't afford attorneys, people the system had already written off. He won cases that more experienced lawyers said were unwinnable. He worked 70-hour weeks, lived in a studio apartment, drove a used Honda Civic, and saved every penny he could. After 6 years as a public defender, he was recruited to the state's attorney's office. He spent the next decade as a prosecutor, building a reputation for fairness and integrity. He didn't just seek convictions, he sought justice. When evidence suggested a defendant was innocent, he was the first to recommend dismissal. When police officers cut corners or violated constitutional rights, he called them out, even when it made him unpopular with law enforcement. In 2012, at age 43, Samuel Carter was appointed to the state superior court by the governor. It was the culmination of everything his parents had sacrificed for, everything he'd worked toward. His mother cried at his investiture ceremony. His father, who'd always been stoic, shook his hand and said simply, "You did it, son. You really did it." Over the next 12 years, Judge Carter presided over thousands of cases. He was known for running a tight courtroom, for giving everyone a fair hearing, and for making decisions based on law and evidence rather than emotion or prejudice. Defense attorneys respected him because he held prosecutors accountable. Prosecutors respected him because he didn't let defendants manipulate the system. Police officers who testified in his courtroom knew they'd better have their facts straight, because Judge Carter would ask the hard questions. He'd also been successful financially. Not wealthy by the standards of corporate lawyers or hedge fund managers, but comfortable. His judicial salary was $185,000 a year. His wife, Angela, was a school principal earning $95,000. They'd been married for 26 years, raised a daughter who was now in medical school, and lived in a beautiful home in a gated community. They'd invested wisely, saved aggressively, and after 2.5 decades of dual incomes, they had accumulated significant assets. 3 months before the incident at the gas station, Samuel had turned 55. Angela had asked him what he wanted for his birthday. He'd surprised her with his answer. "I want to buy a Lamborghini." She'd laughed, thinking he was joking. But he was serious. For his entire adult life, he'd driven practical, sensible vehicles. A Honda Civic, then a Honda Accord, then a Toyota Camry. Safe, reliable, appropriate for a man of his position. But somewhere along the way, he'd realized that appropriate was code for don't make white people uncomfortable. Don't draw attention. Don't show off. Don't act like you've made it, even when you have. He was tired of living by those rules. He'd earned his success through decades of hard work. He'd paid every penny of taxes, never cut corners, never compromised his integrity. If he wanted to drive a Lamborghini, why shouldn't he? What was the point of the American dream if you couldn't enjoy the fruits of your labor? So he bought it. The pearl-white Lamborghini Urus, a $240,000 luxury SUV with a twin-turbocharged V8 engine, hand-stitched leather interior, and every technological feature available. He paid cash, not because he had to, but because he could. Because it felt good to walk into that dealership, sign the paperwork, and drive away in a vehicle that represented everything he'd achieved. Angela had been skeptical at first, worried about how it would look. But when she saw the expression on his face, pure joy, like a kid on Christmas morning, she understood. This wasn't about the car. It was about claiming his place in a country that had spent generations telling Black Americans they didn't belong in spaces of wealth and success. For 3 months, he drove that Lamborghini with pride. He drove it to work, parked it in the courthouse garage, and occasionally caught other judges or attorneys staring. Some made jokes, good-natured ribbing about his midlife crisis mobile. Others seemed uncomfortable, though they never said why. And a few seemed to understand exactly what the car represented. A rejection of the idea that success had to be quiet and apologetic. Then came that Tuesday afternoon in August. A routine stop at the gas station, pump number 4. The tank ran low after a long day at the courthouse. He pulled in at 4:15 p.m., completely unaware that his race, his vehicle, and one officer's prejudices were about to collide in a way that would change his life forever. If you're enjoying this story and believe in holding law enforcement accountable when they violate our constitutional rights, hit that like button and subscribe. These stories need to be told, and your support helps us continue shining a light on injustice. Officer Kevin Mercer had been with the Westside Police Department for 9 years. At age 38, he was a patrol officer with no aspirations for promotion. He liked the street work, liked the authority that came with the badge, liked the feeling of being in control. He saw himself as a protector of the community, a warrior against crime, and, in his own mind, a damn good cop. His personnel file told a different story. 27 civilian complaints over 9 years, averaged out to 3 per year, a rate nearly 10 times higher than his colleagues. 19 of those complaints specifically alleged racial profiling. The pattern was undeniable to anyone who bothered to look. In 2016, Mercer stopped Dr. Richard Morrison, a Black orthopedic surgeon, who was driving his BMW through Oakmont Hills, the affluent gated community where he'd just purchased a home. Mercer detained him for 45 minutes, demanding to know what he was doing lurking around at 3 p.m. on a Sunday. Dr. Morrison explained he was checking on the moving company preparing his house. Mercer insisted on seeing proof of ownership. Even after Dr. Morrison showed him the deed to the property, Mercer made him wait while he called the real estate company to verify. The complaint was filed, reviewed, and dismissed, with a notation that Mercer had been exercising appropriate caution in an affluent neighborhood. In 2018, Mercer pulled over Jennifer Williams, a 22-year-old Black college student who was driving home from her part-time job at 11 p.m. in a 2015 Audi. He immediately demanded to know whose car she was driving, insisting that, quote, "Kids your age don't drive cars like that." Jennifer explained it was a graduation gift from her parents, showed him the registration, and even called her father on speakerphone to verify. Mercer still ran her license 3 times and searched the vehicle for drugs. He found nothing. The complaint alleged racial profiling and illegal search. It was dismissed with a note that Mercer was, quote, being proactive about auto theft in the area. In 2020, Mercer stopped Marcus Johnson, a black entrepreneur who owned 3 successful restaurants, who was driving his Mercedes-Benz E-Class through the commercial district. Mercer demanded receipts proving he'd purchased the vehicle legally, even after the registration clearly showed proper ownership. When Johnson asked why he was being stopped, Mercer told him, expensive cars in this area are often connected to drug trafficking. Johnson filed a complaint and hired an attorney. The department settled quietly for $15,000 to avoid publicity. Mercer received a written warning that was placed in his file and promptly forgotten. The pattern continued. Stop after stop, complaint after complaint, the same story. Mercer would see a black or Hispanic person driving a vehicle he deemed too expensive for them, make assumptions about criminality, ignore evidence of legitimate ownership, and escalate unnecessarily. Each time, the department would review, accept Mercer's explanation, and take minimal action. Some of his fellow officers had noticed. Officer Maria Gonzalez, a 15-year veteran, had filed an internal memo in 2022 expressing serious concerns. She'd done an informal analysis and found that 73% of Mercer's traffic stops over the previous 3 years involved black or Hispanic drivers, despite the department's jurisdiction being only 35% minority. She'd noted specific incidents where Mercer seemed to be fishing for reasons to stop expensive vehicles driven by minorities. Her memo recommended formal investigation and potential reassignment. The memo was acknowledged by a supervisor, filed, and nothing changed. Mercer was never interviewed about it. His patrol assignments weren't modified. The department took no action beyond filing the paperwork. Why? Several reasons. First, Mercer had never been involved in a high-profile incident that generated media attention or political pressure. The complaints were resolved quietly, usually with the department defending their officer and the complainants giving up. Second, Mercer was articulate in his reports. He knew how to write up a stop to make it sound legitimate, using terms like furtive movements, nervous behavior, and high crime area to justify his actions. Third, and perhaps most importantly, there was institutional inertia. Investigating one of their own, potentially disciplining or firing him, would require admitting the department had a problem. It was easier to dismiss complaints and move on. Sergeant Michael Rodriguez, who would later recognize Judge Carter, had worked with Mercer on several occasions. He'd always felt vaguely uncomfortable around the man, but couldn't quite articulate why. Mercer wasn't overtly racist in his language. He didn't use slurs or make explicitly bigoted comments. But there was something in the way he talked about those neighborhoods, the way he described certain suspects, the way he seemed to assume criminality based on appearance rather than behavior. Rodriguez had once questioned Mercer after he'd stopped 3 different black drivers in expensive cars over a single week. "You seeing a pattern in auto thefts or something?" Rodriguez had asked. "Just being proactive," Mercer had replied. "You know how it is. Drug dealers upgrade their rides when business is good. I'm disrupting their operations. Did you find drugs in any of those stops?" "Not yet, but that doesn't mean they're clean. They're just good at hiding it." Rodriguez had dropped the subject, but the conversation stayed with him. The assumption that expensive cars driven by black men must be connected to drugs. Where did that come from? Not from evidence. Not from actual crime statistics. From prejudice, plain and simple. But Rodriguez was a sergeant, not a captain or chief. He couldn't force an investigation on his own authority. And without a smoking gun, a lawsuit, a viral video, a political scandal, the department wasn't going to act. So Kevin Mercer continued patrolling, continued making stops based on his biases, and continued believing he was one of the good guys. In his mind, he wasn't racist. He didn't hate black people. He was just realistic about where crime came from, about which neighborhoods produced criminals, about the connection between luxury vehicles and illegal income. He genuinely believed his instincts were well-honed police work rather than racial profiling. That belief was about to be shattered. On that Tuesday afternoon in August, Mercer was finishing his shift around 4 p.m. He was tired, ready to clock out, looking forward to getting home. He was cruising through the commercial district, mind already on what he'd have for dinner, when he spotted the pearl-white Lamborghini Urus pulling into the gas station. His attention locked onto it immediately. A Lamborghini. In this neighborhood. At this time of day. The vehicle was unfamiliar. He prided himself on knowing the expensive cars in his patrol area, which meant it was either from out of town or new to the area. Either way, it warranted investigation. He pulled into the gas station parking lot slowly, watching as the driver exited the vehicle. A black man, mid-50s, wearing a crisp white suit, professional appearance, but in Mercer's experience, drug dealers often dressed well. The nice clothes didn't mean anything. In that moment, Kevin Mercer's vague suspicion crystallized into certainty. A black man, driving a $240,000 Lamborghini. His mind immediately supplied the explanation: drugs, theft, or money laundering. In 9 years of policing, he'd never stopped to question why his brain made these connections, only when the driver was a person of color. When he saw a white man in an expensive car, he thought successful businessman or tech executive. But a black man in the same car, criminal. He activated his patrol lights and pulled directly behind the Lamborghini, blocking it from leaving. This was going to be a good stop, he could feel it. Maybe a warrant, maybe drugs in the vehicle, maybe even a stolen car report. He'd made detective before, he was sure of it. As he approached, his hand moved instinctively to his service weapon. Not because he felt threatened, the man was just standing there fueling his vehicle, but because Mercer had been trained to treat every encounter as potentially dangerous. And in his mind, expensive cars connected to possible criminal activity meant heightened risk. What Officer Kevin Mercer didn't know, as he walked toward that man in the white suit, was that he wasn't approaching a criminal. He was approaching a superior court judge. A man with 28 years of legal experience. A man who knew the Constitution better than Mercer ever would. A man who'd been through this before and was tired of it. A man who was about to become the worst mistake of Mercer's career. The body camera on Mercer's uniform activated automatically when he exited his vehicle. The gas station security system was recording from 3 angles. And at pump number 5, a social worker named Marcus Williams was pulling out his smartphone, a sick feeling in his stomach, because he'd seen this scenario before and knew exactly where it was headed. Everything that was about to happen would be documented from multiple perspectives. There would be no ambiguity, no he said she said, no room for the department to explain it away. Officer Kevin Mercer's career was about to end. He just didn't know it yet. "Good afternoon, officer," Judge Samuel Carter said evenly, his hands visible, his posture non-threatening. 28 years of legal experience had taught him how to read situations. The officer's hand on his weapon, the blocked exit, the aggressive approach. This wasn't going to be a friendly conversation. Officer Mercer stopped about 6 feet away, his eyes scanning the Lamborghini with obvious suspicion. "That's quite the vehicle you're driving there," he said. His tone wasn't friendly or curious. It was accusatory. "Mind telling me how someone like you ends up with a $250,000 Lamborghini?" Carter felt the words like a physical blow. Someone like you, the coded language that Black Americans had been hearing for generations. The presumption that his race disqualified him from legitimate wealth. He took a slow breath, maintaining his composure. "The same way anyone purchases a vehicle, officer," he replied calmly. "I earned the money and bought it." Mercer's expression showed clear skepticism. "Earned it? Right. Must have been one hell of a payday for that kind of cash." Behind them, Marcus Williams, the social worker, quietly positioned his phone to capture both men in frame. The timestamp on his recording showed 4:17 p.m. He'd been Black in America long enough to know what he was witnessing. This wasn't a traffic stop. This was racial profiling, and he was going to document every second of it. "My career, my income, my property," Carter said, each word measured and deliberate. "Everything about this vehicle is legitimate. I'm going to need to see your license, registration, and proof of insurance," Mercer demanded. Not asked. Demanded. Carter reached slowly toward his jacket pocket. "I'm reaching for my wallet now, officer," he announced clearly. He'd learned long ago that sudden movements during police encounters could be fatal for Black men. He extracted his wallet with deliberate care, then moved to the Lamborghini's driver door to retrieve the registration and insurance documents from the glove compartment. "Keep your hands where I can see them," Mercer instructed sharply. "They are visible, officer," Carter replied evenly. He handed over the documents. The registration clearly showed owner, Samuel J. Carter. Address, 4782 Oakmont Drive. VIN matching the Lamborghini Urus. The proof of insurance showed full coverage from a reputable carrier, with Carter listed as the primary insured. Everything was in perfect order. But Mercer examined the documents like a jeweler searching for flaws in a diamond. He looked at the registration, then at Carter, then back at the registration. His expression suggested he was trying to solve a puzzle that didn't fit his preconceptions. "This address," Mercer said, pointing to the registration. "Oakmont Drive. That's the gated community on the north side." "That's correct," Carter confirmed. "And you live there?" Mercer's tone made it sound impossible. "I do. I've lived there for 6 years with my wife and daughter." Mercer's jaw tightened. Oakmont Drive was one of the most exclusive neighborhoods in the city. Houses there started at $800,000. The residents were executives, doctors, lawyers, the kind of people who belonged in luxury vehicles. But in Mercer's worldview, a Black man living there and driving a Lamborghini didn't compute through legitimate means. "What do you do for a living?" Mercer asked. It was a question with no legitimate law enforcement purpose. Carter hadn't committed a traffic violation. There was no reasonable suspicion of criminal activity. The registration proved ownership. This question was pure fishing. Mercer looking for an explanation that would fit his bias. "I work in the legal profession," Carter answered, keeping his voice neutral. Legal profession, Mercer repeated, his tone dripping with disbelief. You're a lawyer? I work in the legal field, Carter repeated, not yet revealing his full position. He wanted to see how far Mercer would take this. He wanted this officer to dig himself in so deep that there would be no way out. At his own pump, Marcus Williams had moved slightly closer, his phone still recording. 2 other customers had stopped what they were doing to watch. Patricia Henderson, a 68-year-old retired schoolteacher, felt distinctly uncomfortable with what she was witnessing. She'd taught for 35 years in integrated schools, believed in equality, and voted for civil rights candidates. But watching this unfold in real time, seeing a well-dressed professional being treated like a criminal for no apparent reason, struck her as fundamentally wrong. Registration can be forged, Mercer said suddenly, handing the documents back. Insurance cards can be faked. These documents prove nothing about how you actually acquired this vehicle. Carter felt his patience beginning to fray, but he kept his voice level. Officer, I suggest you run the VIN through your system. Contact the Department of Motor Vehicles. You'll find that everything is registered correctly, that there are no liens on the vehicle, and that I am the legal owner. Or, Mercer countered, stepping slightly closer, I could impound the vehicle right now as suspected stolen property and let the detectives sort it out downtown. It was a naked threat. Comply with my assumptions, or I'll ruin your day. It was also an illegal detention. Carter's legal mind was cataloging every violation. This stop had no reasonable suspicion of criminal activity. No traffic violation had occurred. The officer's sole basis appeared to be the combination of his race and his vehicle. Fourth Amendment violation. 14th Amendment Equal Protection violation. California Racial and Identity Profiling Act violation. But citing constitutional law to a patrol officer who'd already demonstrated his bias was unlikely to de-escalate the situation. Carter made a strategic decision. He would give Mercer one final opportunity to end this professionally. If Mercer refused, Carter would reveal his position and let the consequences unfold. Officer Mercer, Carter said, reading the name from the badge, I understand that you're doing your job. But I need you to understand something. This stop has no legal basis. I haven't committed any traffic violation. I've provided valid registration and insurance. You have no reasonable suspicion that I'm involved in any criminal activity. What you're doing right now is racial profiling, and it's illegal. Mercer's face flushed red. Being lectured about the law by the person he was detaining triggered his ego. I'll decide what's legal and what isn't, he snapped. Right now you're operating a high-value vehicle that you may or may not have acquired legally. Until I'm satisfied, you're not going anywhere. Carter reached carefully into his jacket pocket again. Then let me help you become satisfied, he said. Officer Mercer, my name is Samuel Carter. I am a Superior Court judge for this county. Here are my judicial credentials. He held out his judicial identification, the official badge that Superior Court judges carry, showing his photograph, name, and position. The seal of the state was embossed in gold. The credential was unmistakable, impossible to fake, and carried an authority that should have immediately ended this encounter. For a moment, Mercer stared at it. Carter watched emotions cross the officer's face: confusion, disbelief, defensiveness. This was the moment when most officers would apologize profusely, realize their terrible mistake, and terminate the encounter immediately. Kevin Mercer's ego wouldn't allow it. A judge? Mercer said, his voice skeptical bordering on mocking. You expect me to believe that? Carter felt a cold shock of disbelief. The officer was actually questioning whether his judicial credentials were legitimate. You can verify my identity with a single phone call, Carter said, his voice now carrying an edge. Contact the courthouse. Contact judicial services. Contact your own supervisor. If you were really a judge, Mercer said, his voice taking on a condescending tone, you wouldn't be driving this car. The words hung in the air. Carter understood exactly what Mercer was saying. Judges should drive appropriate vehicles, conservative sedans, professional cars, nothing flashy, nothing that draws attention, and certainly nothing that costs $250,000. The subtext was even clearer. A black judge should know his place, should understand that too much success, too much visibility was inappropriate. Threatening even. What exactly would I be driving, Officer Mercer? Carter asked, his voice dangerous now. Something more appropriate, Mercer replied. Something that doesn't draw attention. In that moment, Samuel Carter understood this officer had been enabled by a system that never held him accountable. He'd been presented with overwhelming evidence that he was wrong: registration, insurance, judicial credentials, and he was still doubling down because his ego couldn't accept being corrected by a black man. Officer, Carter said, his voice controlled but firm. Everything you're doing right now is being recorded. That man over there has his phone out. Your body cam is active. The gas station has security cameras from multiple angles. I'm telling you this because I want you to understand that your decision at this moment will have consequences that extend far beyond this gas station. Mercer glanced at Marcus Williams, at his phone, then back at Carter. For a brief second, Carter thought reason might prevail. But then Mercer's hand moved to his handcuffs. The only person who needs to worry about consequences is you, Mercer said. Turn around and put your hands behind your back. You're under arrest for suspicion of grand theft auto and possession of forged government documents. The words hung in the air like a gunshot. You're under arrest. Samuel Carter had sent hundreds of people to prison over his career. He'd heard those words spoken in his courtroom thousands of times, but he'd never heard them directed at him, and certainly not for the crime of being black while successful. Officer Mercer, Carter said, his voice remarkably steady. I am not turning around. I am not placing my hands behind my back. You have no probable cause for arrest. No crime has been committed. What you're attempting to do right now is false arrest, unlawful detention, and kidnapping under color of law. Resisting arrest, Mercer added to his mental list of charges, his hand now on his handcuffs. Turn around now, or I will use force. Marcus Williams, still recording from 15 feet away, found his voice. Officer, please. He's a judge. He's shown you his credentials. There's no crime here. Please don't do this. Mercer's head whipped toward Marcus. Sir, you need to step back and stop interfering with police business, or you'll be arrested too for obstruction. Patricia Henderson, the retired schoolteacher, couldn't stay silent any longer. Officer, I've been here the whole time. That man hasn't done anything wrong. He just pulled up to get gas like everyone else. This isn't right. Ma'am, return to your vehicle, Mercer said, his frustration building as he realized he had an audience watching his every move. But the audience was exactly what Judge Carter needed. Witnesses who could testify. Documentation that would be impossible to dispute. Multiple angles of video that would show, beyond any doubt, that this was racial profiling that had escalated to unlawful arrest. Officer Kevin Mercer, badge number 7294, Carter said clearly, reading from the uniform, speaking both to the officer and to the camera's recording. You are currently attempting to arrest a superior court judge without probable cause, based solely on your assumption that a black man cannot legitimately own a luxury vehicle. This is racial profiling under California's Racial and Identity Profiling Act of 2015. This is an unlawful detention under the Fourth Amendment to the United States Constitution. This is a violation of my civil rights under Title 42, United States Code, Section 1983. Every element of your conduct since you blocked my vehicle has been illegal, and you are personally liable for damages. The legal citations seemed to enrage Mercer rather than give him pause. In his mind, Carter's knowledge of law was further evidence of criminality. Maybe he was a con artist who'd studied legal jargon to sound legitimate. His paranoia was feeding on itself. People like you, Mercer said, and the phrase hung in the air like poison. People like you always have an excuse. Always have a story. You think throwing around legal terms makes you sound legitimate? I've dealt with drug dealers who can cite case law. I've arrested car thieves who had fake credentials that looked real. You're not special. People like me, Carter repeated, his voice finally showing the anger he'd been suppressing. Say what you mean, officer. Let it be clear for the cameras. What exactly do you mean by people like me? Mercer's face flushed, realizing he'd stepped into dangerous territory. But he'd gone too far to back down. People who think they can flash some money, buy an expensive car, and suddenly they're above the law. No, Carter said, his voice cutting through the afternoon air. You mean black people. You mean you can't believe a black man could earn a position as a superior court judge through decades of education and public service. You can't believe a black man could legally purchase a $240,000 vehicle with money earned through legitimate work. You saw my race and made an assumption. You've ignored every piece of evidence I've provided because it doesn't fit your prejudice. And now you're about to arrest a sitting judge because your ego won't allow you to admit you're wrong. The gas station had gone silent except for the ambient noise of traffic. The other customers were frozen, watching history unfold. Marcus Williams made sure his phone captured every word. This wasn't just a traffic stop anymore. This was a case study in systemic racism, playing out in real time, documented for the world to see. Mercer unclipped his handcuffs from his belt. Last warning. Turn around. Carter made a calculation. He could continue to resist verbally, but physical resistance would give Mercer justification to use force. And while Carter was confident in his legal position, he was also realistic about what happened when black men physically resisted arrest, regardless of whether the arrest was lawful. He'd presided over too many cases where resisting arrest became the justification for violence. The courthouse would vindicate him. The street might not. I am complying under duress and protest, Carter announced clearly, his voice carrying across the gas station. Let the record reflect that I am an innocent man being unlawfully arrested by an officer engaged in racial profiling. I am complying to avoid physical violence, not because this arrest has any legal basis whatsoever. He turned around slowly, placing his hands behind his back. The sensation of cold metal handcuffs against his wrists was surreal. A superior court judge, a man who dedicated his life to upholding the law, being handcuffed at a gas station for the crime of driving while black. The ratcheting click of the cuffs echoed in the silence. Patricia Henderson had tears in her eyes. Marcus Williams felt sick to his stomach, but kept recording. This video would matter. This documentation would matter. Mercer's radio crackled. Unit 42, what's your status? You called for backup 12 minutes ago but didn't provide details. Mercer reached for his radio. This is Unit 42. I'm Code 4. Situation under control. I need a transport unit. I've got a suspect in custody for grand theft auto and possession of forged documents. Copy that, Unit 42. Sergeant Rodriguez is en route, ETA 2 minutes. Mercer felt a surge of satisfaction. His sergeant would see that he'd made a good stop. Once they ran the VIN and discovered the vehicle was reported stolen, and Mercer was certain it would be, he'd get commendations. Maybe even that detective position he'd been wanting. What Mercer didn't know was that Sergeant Michael Rodriguez had been called to testify in criminal trials dozens of times over his career. More than half of those appearances had been in the courtroom of Judge Samuel Carter. Rodriguez would recognize the judge immediately. And when he did, Kevin Mercer's entire world was about to collapse. A second patrol car pulled into the gas station, lights flashing. Sergeant Rodriguez stepped out, a 16-year veteran known for level-headed judgment and by-the-book policing. He walked toward the scene, taking in the details. The pearl-white Lamborghini, the well-dressed black man in handcuffs, Officer Mercer looking defensive and proud, the crowd of witnesses with phones out recording everything. Something felt very wrong about this picture. He got closer, his eyes on the man in handcuffs. The face was familiar, very familiar. The white suit, the dignified bearing even in restraints, the expression of controlled fury. Recognition hit Sergeant Rodriguez like a freight train, and his face went pale. Officer Mercer, Rodriguez said slowly, his voice carrying a note of absolute horror. Please tell me you did not just handcuff Judge Samuel Carter. Time seemed to stop. Officer Kevin Mercer looked at his sergeant, confusion evident on his face. Sarge, this guy says he's a judge, but step away from Judge Carter immediately. Rodriguez commanded, his voice sharp and urgent. His face had gone from pale to flushed with anger and fear. What the hell do you think you're doing? Sarge, this guy is driving a stolen Lamborghini. He's got fake documents, fake credentials that look official, but that's Judge Samuel Carter from the Superior Court. Rodriguez interrupted, his voice rising. I've testified in his courtroom at least 15 times. I was there 3 weeks ago on the Henderson assault case. Jesus Christ, Mercer, tell me you didn't actually arrest him. Mercer's certainty began to crack like ice under pressure. But doesn't it look like Mercer? Rodriguez's voice was dangerous now, the voice of a supervisor who'd just watched a subordinate commit career suicide. Finish that sentence. Tell me what a judge is supposed to look like. The silence that followed was deafening. Marcus Williams captured every second on his phone. Patricia Henderson stood with her hand over her mouth. The other witnesses watched in stunned silence. The body cam footage was recording Mercer's face as the reality of his situation began to dawn on him. Rodriguez moved quickly to Judge Carter, his hand shaking slightly as he pulled out his handcuff key. Your Honor, I am so deeply sorry about this. I'm removing these handcuffs immediately. He unlocked the restraints with urgent care. Judge Carter, on behalf of the entire department, I apologize. This should never, ever have happened. Carter rubbed his wrists where the metal had bitten into his skin. His face was unreadable, but his eyes held the cold fury that Rodriguez recognized from the courtroom. The look Carter got when he was about to deliver a scathing rebuke to a lawyer who'd crossed an ethical line. Sergeant Rodriguez, Carter said quietly, his voice controlled but carrying unmistakable authority. I want to be very clear about what happened here today. Officer Mercer initiated this stop based purely on racial profiling. I presented valid registration proving ownership. I presented proof of insurance. I presented my judicial credentials. Officer Mercer accused me of forgery, threatened to impound my legally owned vehicle, and then arrested me for crimes I didn't commit. At no point during this entire encounter was there any reasonable suspicion of criminal activity. At no point was there probable cause for arrest. This was driving while black, at its most blatant and inexcusable. Rodriguez's jaw tightened. He turned to Mercer, his expression combining anger, disappointment, and genuine fear for what this meant for the department. Badges and guns. Right now. What? Mercer's face showed total disbelief. Sarge, I was just doing my job. I was being proactive. Badge and gun, Officer Mercer. You're suspended effective immediately. pending investigation. Rodriguez's voice was steel. You just handcuffed a superior court judge based on racial profiling after he identified himself and showed you his official credentials. Do you have any idea what you've done? Any idea at all what this means? The color drained from Mercer's face as the full implications began to sink in. His career, his pension, his future, everything he'd built over 9 years, all of it suddenly hanging by a thread. But there was also confusion in his expression. He'd done this dozens of times before. He'd stopped black drivers in expensive cars, questioned their ownership, made demands that went beyond legal authority. Why was this different? The answer was simple but profound. Because this time, his victim had enough power, position, and resources to demand accountability. All the other times, the victims had been ordinary citizens without the platform or credibility to fight back effectively. They'd filed complaints that were dismissed. They'd been told they were overreacting. They'd been made to feel like they were the problem. Judge Samuel Carter was different. And that difference was about to change everything, not just for Mercer, but for the entire department. Your Honor, Rodriguez said, turning back to Carter, would you be willing to come to the station to file a formal complaint? I'll personally ensure this is documented properly and investigated thoroughly. Carter's laugh was bitter, the sound of a man who'd heard empty promises before. Sergeant, I'll be filing more than a complaint. I'll be filing a federal civil rights lawsuit under Section 1983. I'll be requesting a Department of Justice investigation into systemic discrimination and pattern and practice violations within your department. And I'll be demanding a comprehensive review of Officer Mercer's previous stops to identify other victims of his racial profiling. Because I guarantee you, Sergeant, I am not the first. I'm just the first, with enough power to make it matter. He looked directly at Mercer, who was slowly removing his badge with trembling hands, the weight of his actions finally hitting him. Officer Mercer, you asked earlier what people like me do for a living. Let me tell you exactly what I do. I preside over cases involving civil rights violations, police misconduct, and unlawful detentions. I understand the Fourth Amendment better than you ever will. I know every element of a Section 1983 claim. I've sent police officers to federal prison for violating people's constitutional rights. And I have just experienced, personally and viscerally, the exact type of systemic racism I've seen documented in hundreds of cases over my career. You didn't just pick the wrong person to profile, Officer Mercer. You picked someone who has the knowledge, the resources, and the platform to ensure this never happens to anyone else. Marcus Williams stepped forward, his phone still recording. Judge Carter, sir, I got the whole thing on video. From the moment Officer Mercer pulled up with his lights until right now. Every word, every action. If you need it for your lawsuit, it's yours. No charge. Patricia Henderson added, her voice shaking with emotion. I'll testify too, Your Honor. I saw everything. I'm a retired school teacher. I taught for 35 years, and I taught my students that everyone deserves to be treated with dignity and respect. What this officer did to you was wrong. It was shameful. And I'll say that in court if you need me to. Carter nodded his thanks to both of them, his expression softening slightly. Thank you both. Your willingness to stand up and speak out matters more than you know. This is how change happens, when good people refuse to stay silent in the face of injustice. He looked at the gas station security cameras, at the body cam on Mercer's uniform, at Rodriguez's patrol car dash camera. This incident was documented from every conceivable angle. There would be no disputing what happened. No way for the department to claim it was a misunderstanding, or that Carter had been uncooperative or threatening. Sergeant Rodriguez, Carter said, his voice formal now, switching into the judicial tone he used in the courtroom. I'll expect a complete incident report on my desk by 9 o'clock tomorrow morning. I'll also expect notification of the Internal Affairs Investigation case number and the name of the investigator assigned to this matter. Officer Mercer, you have the right to remain silent during this investigation, and I strongly suggest you exercise that right and consult with an attorney immediately. Anything you say at this point will likely make your situation considerably worse. The irony wasn't lost on anyone present. A judge, just moments ago in handcuffs at a gas station, was now delivering Miranda-style warnings to the officer who'd arrested him. The tables had turned completely. Carter walked to his Lamborghini, opened the door, and paused. He looked at the small crowd that had gathered, witnesses who'd stopped their own activities to watch this confrontation unfold. This is what racial profiling looks like, he said, his voice carrying across the gas station. It doesn't matter if you're a judge, a doctor, a teacher, a veteran, or a janitor. If you're black in America and you're driving something nice, you become a suspect. You become someone who needs to explain yourself, justify your success, prove you're not a criminal. This has to change, and I promise you, it will change, starting today. He climbed into the driver's seat, started the engine, the V8 rumbling to life, and drove away. The pearl-white Lamborghini Urus disappeared into traffic, leaving behind a gas station full of shaken witnesses, a suspended officer facing the end of his career, and video evidence that would soon go viral and change the trajectory of the West Side Police Department forever. If this story is making you think about justice and accountability, please share it with someone who needs to see it. Hit that like button and subscribe so we can continue bringing you stories that matter. Because sunlight, as they say, is the best disinfectant. Marcus Williams uploaded his video at 6:47 p.m. that same evening. He posted it to 3 social media platforms simultaneously, with a caption that was simple but powerful. Racist cop arrests black judge for, quote, driving while black. No traffic violation. Just racial profiling. This is America in 2024. Within 30 minutes, the video had 10,000 views. Within 2 hours, it had crossed 100,000. By midnight, it had reached 2 million views and was trending on every major social media platform. By the next morning, it had 15 million views, and news organizations across the country were running segments on it. He'd already reviewed Officer Mercer's personnel file and felt sick to his stomach at the 27 complaints that had been documented but essentially ignored. He'd already spoken with the city attorney, who'd told him in no uncertain terms that the city's position was legally indefensible. How did this happen? Daniels demanded, though he already knew the answer. It had happened because the department had a culture of protecting officers rather than holding them accountable. It had happened because complaints were treated as nuisances rather than warning signs. It had happened because supervisors looked the other way rather than confronting problems. It had happened because institutional inertia was easier than institutional change. Sergeant Rodriguez delivered his incident report at the meeting. It was comprehensive and scathing. He detailed every aspect of the stop: Mercer's lack of reasonable suspicion, the dismissal of valid documentation, the racial profiling, the unlawful arrest of a superior court judge. He also included a recommendation for immediate termination and a suggestion that the department review all of Mercer's previous stops for similar constitutional violations and potential criminal conduct. I've worked with Judge Carter for years, Rodriguez told the assembled command staff. He's testified in his courtroom. He's one of the most respected judges in this county. He's fair, knowledgeable, and treats everyone, police, defendants, attorneys, with respect as long as they follow the law. And we handcuffed him at a gas station for being black and successful. We need to own this. We need to fix this. And we need to make damn sure it never happens again. Internal Affairs opened an investigation, but everyone knew it was a formality. The video evidence was overwhelming. Officer Kevin Mercer had violated department policy, state law, and constitutional protections. There was no defense. There was no explanation that would make this acceptable. The only question was how severe the consequences would be. By Wednesday afternoon, the department issued a press release announcing that Officer Mercer had been placed on unpaid suspension pending the outcome of the investigation. The statement included a public apology to Judge Carter and a vague promise to review training protocols and accountability measures. But the carefully worded statement did nothing to quell the public outrage. Community activists organized protests for Thursday evening. They demanded more than Mercer's termination. They demanded comprehensive reform, an end to racial profiling, citizen oversight with real power, transparent complaint processes, and consequences for supervisors who ignore warning signs. The police union tried to defend Mercer, issuing a statement arguing that he'd been following his training and acting on his professional instincts regarding suspicious circumstances. The statement was a public relations disaster. Trying to argue that the department trained officers to profile black drivers in expensive cars was exactly the wrong message. The union quickly retracted the statement and went silent. On Thursday, 3 days after the incident, the department announced that Officer Kevin Mercer had been terminated for cause. The announcement cited violations of department policy regarding bias-based policing, unlawful detention, false arrest, and conduct unbecoming an officer. It also mentioned that the matter had been referred to the district attorney's office for potential criminal charges related to false imprisonment and deprivation of rights under color of law. But the damage to the department's reputation was already done. The video had exposed not just one officer's racism, but the systemic failure that had allowed him to continue profiling citizens for 9 years despite 27 documented complaints. It had revealed a culture where protecting officers took priority over protecting constitutional rights. Meanwhile, Judge Samuel Carter was working methodically and deliberately. He'd spent 28 years in the legal system. He knew exactly how to proceed. He'd contacted Matthew Chen, one of the most respected civil rights attorneys in the state, a man who'd successfully litigated dozens of police misconduct cases. Chen agreed to take the case, and together they began building what would become a landmark federal civil rights lawsuit. Carter documented every detail of the incident while it was fresh in his memory. He requested and received copies of all video and audio recordings, the body cam footage, the dash camera footage, the gas station security cameras, Marcus Williams' cell phone video. He obtained Officer Mercer's complete personnel file through a discovery request. He began drafting a formal complaint to the Department of Justice, requesting a pattern and practice investigation under 42 U.S.C. Section 14141. But he was also dealing with the emotional aftermath. Angela, his wife, had been terrified when he called her from the gas station to explain what happened. She'd wanted to come immediately, but he'd told her to wait until he got home. When he walked through the door that evening, she'd held him for a long time without speaking. "I keep thinking about what could have happened," she'd said finally. "If you'd moved wrong, if he'd thought you were reaching for something, if you'd been anyone other than a judge with a phone full of attorney contacts, Samuel, you could have been killed." He'd known she was right. The statistics were clear. Black men were killed during police encounters at rates far higher than their white counterparts. And many of those encounters started exactly like this one, a minor stop that escalated because an officer made assumptions based on race. "I'm okay," he told her. "I'm angry, but I'm okay. And I'm going to make sure something good comes from this." 2 weeks after the incident, on a Thursday afternoon, Matthew Chen filed the federal lawsuit in the United States District Court. The complaint was a masterpiece of legal precision and moral clarity. The case was titled, Carter v. Mercer, City of Westside and Westside Police Department. The complaint named Officer Kevin Mercer individually, Police Chief Raymond Daniels in his official capacity, and the City of Westside as defendants. It alleged violations of the Fourth Amendment, unreasonable seizure and false arrest, the 14th Amendment, equal protection, and California's Racial and Identity Profiling Act. It sought both compensatory and punitive damages, as well as injunctive relief requiring comprehensive departmental reforms. But what made the complaint particularly powerful was how it contextualized the incident. It wasn't just about one bad stop. It was about a pattern of systemic failure. The complaint detailed Officer Mercer's 27 previous complaints, 19 of which specifically alleged racial profiling. It included statistical analysis showing that 73% of Mercer's traffic stops involved minority drivers, despite the jurisdiction being only 35% minority. It referenced 5 specific incidents where Mercer had stopped black drivers in luxury vehicles without reasonable suspicion, demanded proof of ownership despite valid registration, and made assumptions about criminal activity based on race. The complaint also addressed the department's supervisory failures. It documented how complaints were routinely dismissed or minimized. It showed how Officer Maria Gonzalez's 2022 memo raising concerns about Mercer's stop patterns had been acknowledged but never acted upon. It demonstrated that the department had constructive notice of Mercer's pattern of racial profiling, but had done nothing meaningful to stop it, making them liable for deliberate indifference under Section 1983. When the city attorney read the complaint, he immediately understood that taking this case to trial would be a disaster. The video evidence was damning, the pattern evidence was overwhelming, and putting Officer Mercer on the stand to explain his actions would only make things worse. He called Matthew Chen the next morning to discuss settlement. The settlement negotiations took place 4 months after the incident, in a conference room at the federal courthouse, the same building where Judge Samuel Carter typically presided, though he'd recused himself from hearing any cases involving the West Side Police Department during the pendency of his lawsuit. The city's negotiating team included the city attorney, Chief Daniels, and a representative from the mayor's office. They looked uncomfortable and grim. Judge Carter was represented by Matthew Chen and a team of 3 civil rights attorneys who joined the case pro bono, seeing it as an opportunity to force systemic change. The city attorney opened with an offer of $250,000 and a written apology. It was insulting, and everyone in the room knew it. Matthew Chen didn't even dignify it with a counteroffer. Instead, he set up a laptop and showed them the video again, even though they'd all seen it dozens of times. Then he pulled up analytics showing 47 million views across all platforms. He presented polling data showing that 82% of county residents believed the department had a serious racial profiling problem. He outlined the case he would present to a jury, a respected judge with nearly 3 decades of public service, handcuffed at a gas station for the crime of being black and successful. "You don't have a defense," Chen said flatly. "You have viral video evidence of racial profiling and false arrest. You have a terminated officer with 27 complaints that your department ignored for 9 years. You have documented proof that supervisors were warned about this pattern and did nothing. And you have a victim who happens to be one of the most respected jurists in this state, a man who understands civil rights law better than anyone in this room." He paused, letting that sink in. "Take this to trial, and I'll call 14 other victims of Officer Mercer's racial profiling to testify. I'll put on expert witnesses about implicit bias and systemic racism in policing. I'll show the jury internal emails where supervisors discussed Mercer's complaint history and decided to do nothing. Every newspaper in this state will cover it daily. Every evening news broadcast will run segments. And at the end of it all, the jury will award Judge Carter whatever he asks for, and probably more, given how sympathetic he is and how egregious your conduct was. Chen leaned forward. But here's what should really concern you. This case isn't just about money. It's about injunctive relief. Judge Carter wants court-ordered reforms, mandatory bias training, civilian oversight, early intervention systems, transparent complaint processes. A federal judge is going to impose those requirements on you whether you settle or go to trial. The only question is whether you want to participate in shaping those reforms, or have them forced down your throat after a trial where all your dirty laundry gets aired in public. So I suggest you go back to your client and come back with a serious offer. The city attorney excused himself to call the mayor. The conversation lasted 40 minutes. When he returned, he was authorized to negotiate seriously. The negotiation took 2 full days. The sticking points weren't just about money. They were about accountability and reform. Judge Carter had made clear through his attorneys that this case wasn't primarily about compensating him personally. It was about ensuring that what happened to him would never happen to anyone else. The final settlement, reached late on a Friday afternoon, was comprehensive. Monetary settlement, $9.5 million. The breakdown was structured to make clear what each component represented. $2.5 million in compensatory damages for pain, suffering, and emotional distress. $1.5 million for reputational harm and loss of dignity. $1 million for violation of constitutional rights. $500,000 in nominal damages to acknowledge the wrongfulness of the conduct. $4 million in punitive damages designed to punish the department for deliberate indifference to a known pattern of misconduct. But the money was only part of the settlement. Judge Carter had insisted on structural reforms, and the agreement included detailed injunctive relief that would fundamentally change how the department operated. Mandatory reforms, early intervention system, implementation of a sophisticated data tracking system that would automatically flag any officer who received 5 or more civilian complaints within a 3-year period, or 3 or more complaints alleging the same type of misconduct, such as racial profiling. Flagged officers would be subject to mandatory review, counseling, and possible reassignment. Bias training, quarterly implicit bias training for all sworn officers, conducted by outside experts rather than department personnel. The training would use real-world scenarios, including the Carter incident, to illustrate how unconscious bias leads to constitutional violations. Civilian Oversight Board, establishment of a 7-member civilian oversight board with genuine power, not just an advisory role. The board would have subpoena authority, the ability to review all use-of-force incidents and civilian complaints, and the power to recommend discipline up to and including termination. Body camera enhancement, revision of body camera policies to require activation during all public contacts without exception. Any officer who turned off a camera during a public encounter would face automatic investigation. All body camera footage from complaints would be automatically reviewed by supervisors and the oversight board. Traffic stop documentation. New policies requiring officers to document in writing the specific reasonable suspicion for every traffic stop. The documentation had to be completed within 24 hours and would be subject to supervisory review and quarterly audits. Transparent reporting. Annual public reporting of all stop data, broken down by race, neighborhood, officer, and outcome. The data would be posted online in accessible formats, allowing community members and researchers to identify patterns. Community liaison. Creation of a full-time community liaison position, filled by someone with credibility in minority communities, to facilitate communication, address concerns, and serve as an early warning system for problems. Additionally, $2 million of the settlement would be placed in a dedicated fund, administered by an independent trustee, to support these reforms over a 5-year period. This ensured that the city couldn't claim budget constraints prevented implementation. The settlement also included specific provisions regarding Officer Mercer. He would be placed on a statewide do not hire list, maintained by the California Commission on Peace Officer Standards and Training, ensuring he couldn't simply move to another department and continue his pattern of misconduct. On Monday morning, exactly 4 months and 3 days after the gas station incident, a press conference was held on the courthouse steps to announce the settlement. Judge Samuel Carter stood at a podium with Matthew Chen beside him. Reporters packed the plaza. Television cameras lined the back. The video of his arrest had made him a national figure, a symbol of racial profiling in America, but he'd largely avoided media attention until now. This settlement represents more than compensation for what happened to me personally, Carter began, his voice steady and carrying across the plaza. It represents a commitment to change. Officer Mercer didn't wake up one day and spontaneously decide to profile black drivers. He was enabled by a system that ignored complaint after complaint, that prioritized protecting officers over protecting citizens' constitutional rights, that chose institutional convenience over accountability. That system failed not just me, but dozens of other people who didn't have my resources, my platform, or my ability to fight back. He paused, scanning the crowd. Several faces in the audience were black men and women who'd come forward after seeing his video, sharing their own stories of being stopped, questioned, and humiliated for no reason other than their race. "I'm a judge," Carter continued. "I have power within the legal system. I have access to excellent attorneys. I have a platform that amplified my story. But what about the 22-year-old college student who got stopped for driving her parents' Audi and was accused of stealing it? What about the surgeon who was detained for lurking in his own mother's neighborhood? What about the restaurant owner who was demanded to produce receipts proving he'd purchased his Mercedes legally? Those people filed complaints that went nowhere. Their videos didn't go viral. They didn't get settlements or justice. This settlement is for them too. The $9.5 million is significant," he acknowledged. "But the reforms are more important. We're creating accountability mechanisms that should have existed from the beginning. We're ensuring that officers who engage in racial profiling face consequences before they harm dozens of people. We're bringing transparency to a system that has operated in shadows for too long. We're giving the community real oversight power, not just lip service." A reporter called out a question. "Judge Carter, do you really think this will change police behavior?" Carter's expression was serious, thoughtful. "Money alone won't change behavior. Fear of lawsuits won't eliminate racism from people's hearts. But transparency, oversight, and accountability, those things can force institutional change. When officers know their stops will be reviewed and patterns will be identified. When supervisors know they'll be held accountable for ignoring warning signs. When the community has real oversight power with teeth, that creates structural pressure for change. Will it be perfect? No. Will it be better than what we have now? Yes. And better is how progress happens. Incrementally, persistently, refusing to accept that the status quo is acceptable." Another question. "Do you think Officer Mercer is just a bad apple, or is this systemic?" "Officer Mercer made individual choices that day," Carter replied. "He chose to see a black man as a suspect, rather than a citizen. He chose to ignore evidence that contradicted his assumptions. He chose to let his prejudices override his training and the Constitution he swore to uphold. Those were his choices, and he's being held accountable for them. But the system enabled those choices by never imposing meaningful consequences when he made them before, 27 times before, to be precise. The system is what allowed a bad apple to remain in the barrel for 9 years, spoiling everything around it. We need to fix both the individual accountability and the systemic problems. One without the other won't work. Will you continue serving as a judge?" Carter smiled slightly, genuinely. "Absolutely. I love my work. I believe in the justice system, despite its flaws and failures. This experience hasn't made me cynical. It's made me more committed. Every time I take the bench now, I'll remember what it felt like to have my rights violated, to be treated as less than human because of my race. That will make me a better judge. It will make me more vigilant about protecting constitutional rights, more skeptical of police testimony that doesn't add up, more aware of how bias, conscious and unconscious, infects the legal system. If anything, this experience has strengthened my commitment to equal justice under law." The press conference lasted nearly an hour. When it ended, Judge Samuel Carter walked down the courthouse steps, the same steps he'd walked up and down thousands of times over 12 years, and climbed into his pearl-white Lamborghini Urus. He'd considered selling it after the incident. Angela had suggested it might be easier, less stressful, to just drive something that didn't attract attention. But their daughter, Jasmine, home from medical school for the weekend, had talked him out of it. "Dad, don't let them take that from you," she'd said fiercely. "You earned that car through decades of hard work and sacrifice. You love that car. Don't give them the power to make you ashamed of your success. Drive it proudly. Show them that being black and successful isn't a crime, no matter how much they want to treat it that way." So he drove it. To work, to the grocery store, to church on Sundays, past the gas station where it all happened. And every time someone stared, every time he saw recognition in their eyes, he knew why. He'd become a symbol. Not by choice, but by circumstance. A symbol that success while black shouldn't be suspicious. A symbol that accountability matters. A symbol that fighting back against injustice can create change. 6 months after the settlement, the reforms were taking hold in ways both measurable and intangible. The Civilian Oversight Board had reviewed 53 complaints in its first 5 months of operation. They'd sustained 14 of them and recommended disciplinary action ranging from written reprimands to termination. 3 of those sustained complaints had been previously dismissed by Internal Affairs, demonstrating exactly why civilian oversight mattered. The early intervention system had flagged 7 officers with concerning patterns. 3 had been given mandatory counseling and retraining, with close monitoring of their subsequent stops. 2 had been transferred to administrative positions, where they had no public contact. 1 had resigned, rather than face the enhanced scrutiny. And 1, after showing genuine willingness to examine his biases and modify his behavior, had been returned to patrol with quarterly check-ins. The mandatory bias training was initially met with resistance from some veteran officers, who resented being lectured about racism. But the professional facilitators were skilled at their work, using real scenarios and documented cases to illustrate how implicit bias led to constitutional violations and career-ending lawsuits. They used the Carter incident as a centerpiece case study. Slowly, grudgingly, some officers began to question their assumptions and recognize their blind spots. Body camera compliance had increased from 67% to 96%. The automatic review process had flagged several concerning incidents that led to early interventions and prevented escalation. Officers knew they were being watched, and it showed in their behavior. Most significantly, the traffic stop data showed measurable change. Stops of minority drivers had decreased by 22% overall, while the rate of actual arrests or citations, indicating legitimate stops based on probable cause rather than fishing expeditions, had increased by 8%. This suggested that officers were being more selective, focusing on actual violations rather than demographic profiling. Kevin Mercer, meanwhile, had moved to Arizona and was working security at a shopping mall. The statewide do not hire list had worked. No California law enforcement agency would touch him. He'd tried applying in Nevada and Arizona, but even out-of-state agencies were wary once they saw his termination record and the viral video. He'd given one interview to a conservative podcast host who was sympathetic to police, claiming he'd been made a scapegoat for systemic problems, and that political correctness had destroyed his career. The interview only reinforced how little he understood about what he'd done wrong. He still saw himself as the victim. Judge Samuel Carter had returned to his regular docket. His courtroom was where he felt most at home, presiding over the complicated, messy work of justice. But the experience had changed him in subtle but important ways. When police officers testified in his courtroom now, he asked harder questions about their stops and searches. When they claimed, quote, furtive movements or nervous behavior as justification, he demanded specifics. When stop patterns emerged in testimony, he noted them. He was always fair. That was his nature and his oath. But he was more alert to how power could be abused and how bias could masquerade as professional judgment. He'd also started teaching a course at the local law school, Constitutional Policing and Civil Rights. The class was oversubscribed within hours of being announced. He used his own case as the opening lecture, showing the video, walking students through the legal analysis, discussing the systemic failures that enabled it. His students, future prosecutors, defense attorneys, judges, and even police officers, were riveted. Many would carry those lessons throughout their careers. The Lamborghini Urus had become something of a legend around town. People recognized it. Sometimes they'd stop him to say thank you, to share their own stories of being profiled, to express hope that things were changing. Carter listened to all of them, understanding that each story represented pain and humiliation that should never have happened. One evening in late February, driving home from the courthouse as the sun set, Carter stopped at a gas station to fuel up. Not the same one. He still avoided that particular location, but a similar station in a different neighborhood. As he stood at the pump, he noticed a young black woman in her 20s climbing out of a BMW 3 Series. She was dressed in scrubs, clearly just off a hospital shift. A patrol car pulled into the station, and Carter saw her body language change immediately. Her hands moved to visible positions. Her posture became careful, controlled, the familiar weariness of someone who'd been through this before. The officer, a rookie Carter didn't recognize, parked, got out, and walked past her without a second glance. He went inside to buy coffee and snacks. The young woman visibly relaxed, her shoulders dropping, her breath releasing. She noticed Carter watching and gave him a small, knowing smile. "Never quite gets easier, does it?" she said. "No," Carter agreed softly. "But maybe, slowly, it can get better." She looked at him more closely, and recognition crossed her face. "You're Judge Carter." "From the video." "I am." "Thank you," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "Seriously, thank you. What you did, fighting back, making them pay, forcing them to change, it matters. It mattered to me personally, because I've been stopped 3 times for driving this car, and each time I thought, this is it. This is when something goes wrong. But now, maybe it won't. Maybe it's actually changing." "What do you do?" Carter asked. "I'm a nurse, pediatric ICU." "That's important, difficult work. So is yours, Your Honor." She finished fueling, gave him a final nod, and drove away in her BMW. Carter watched her go, then looked down at his Lamborghini. The pearl-white paint gleamed in the evening light. He thought about all the assumptions that vehicle invited, all the reasons people had told him he should drive something more appropriate, something that didn't challenge people's expectations about what a black judge should look like. He thought about Officer Mercer's words. People like you don't drive cars like this. He smiled to himself. People like him, judges, doctors, nurses, teachers, entrepreneurs, veterans, public servants, had every right to drive whatever they wanted. They'd earned it through hard work, sacrifice, and dedication. And the day when that fact stopped being controversial, when success while blacks stopped being treated as inherently suspicious, would be the day when real progress had been made. That day wasn't here yet. The reforms in the Westside Police Department were a start, but they were just one department in one city. Across the country, black Americans were still being profiled, stopped, questioned, and sometimes killed for the crime of existing in spaces that white Americans had historically dominated. But it was closer than it had been 6 months ago. And that was something. That was progress, incremental and imperfect, but real. Carter finished fueling, climbed into his Lamborghini, and drove home through the evening traffic. The fight for justice was long and exhausting. It required persistence, courage, and a refusal to accept that things couldn't change. It required documenting injustice when it happened, demanding accountability when it was denied, and working within the system to make it better even when the system failed. But it was worth it. For that young nurse who might not get stopped next time. For the college student who wouldn't have to prove her car wasn't stolen. For the surgeon who could drive through his own neighborhood without being treated as a criminal. For all the people who came after, who deserved to live in a country where the Constitution's promises applied equally to everyone, regardless of the color of their skin or the car they drove. That was worth fighting for. Always had been. Always would be. If this story moved you, if it made you think about justice and accountability in America, then I'm asking you to do 3 things. First, like this video. It helps us reach more people who need to hear these stories. Second, subscribe to our channel so you don't miss future stories about justice, courage, and the fight for equality. And third, share this with someone who needs to see it. Share it with someone who's been profiled. Share it with someone who doesn't understand why this matters. Share it with someone who believes in the Constitution and equal justice under law. Because stories like Judge Carter's don't just document injustice, they inspire accountability. They show that fighting back matters. They prove that change, while slow and difficult, is possible when good people refuse to stay silent. Thank you for watching. Thank you for caring. And thank you for being part of the solution.